From a timid chemistry teacher to a ruthless drug kingpin, Walter White's transformation was marked by a trail of bodies. But how many lives did Heisenberg truly claim? Let's count every single person Walter White killed. Walter White's transition from a mild-mannered teacher to a ruthless drug kingpin didn't happen overnight, but the moment he first took a life, everything changed. The first person Walter White killed, which set him on his murderous path, was Emilio Koyama. Jesse Pinkman and Emilio Koyama have known each other since they were kids, all the way back to elementary school. But when Emilio got busted in a DEA raid and made bail, he started to suspect that Jesse Pinkman had ratted him out, which put a huge strain on their partnership. So Emilio forces Jesse to take him and Crazy 8 to meet Walter White in Crazy 8's old Buick Regal. When they get there, Emilio recognizes Walt from his arrest and wants to kill both Walt and Jesse. But Walter White managed to talk his way out of it, offering to teach them how to make meth in exchange for their lives. This turned out to be Emilio's biggest mistake, as Walt set off a chemical explosion in the RV, trapping Emilio and Crazy 8 inside with deadly phosphine gas, while Walt made his escape. This was the moment that sealed Emilio's fate, leading to his shocking and untimely death. The unexpected survival of Crazy 8, despite being exposed to the same phosphine gas that killed Emilio Koyama, left Walter White and Jesse Pinkman utterly perplexed. But Crazy 8's good fortune didn't last long. After he tried to escape from Jesse's house and failed, Jesse and Walt locked him up in the basement, chaining him to a pole with a bike lock. Walt and Jesse didn't want to kill anyone else, but they knew they had to do something. So they flipped a coin to see who would get rid of Emilio's body and who would take care of Crazy 8. As it turned out, Jesse got stuck with dissolving Emilio's body, while Walt had to kill Crazy 8. Instead of killing Crazy 8 right away, Walt had a long conversation with him, and they actually bonded. This made Walt rethink his decision, and he chose to release Crazy 8. But things didn't go as smoothly as Walt had hoped. He found out that Crazy 8 had grabbed a piece of broken plate, which meant he'd be in danger if he let him go. Walt was faced with a tough decision, and in the end, he chose to kill Crazy 8. With trembling hands, Walt choked Crazy 8 with the bike lock. The experience clearly traumatized Walt, who then apologized to the dead body, acknowledging that Crazy 8 had forced his hand. Like a dam breaking, Walter White's second murder unleashed a torrent of darkness within him, sweeping away the last vestiges of his moral restraint and propelling him into an abyss of unrelenting violence. Jane Margolis, the third person in this list, is a pivotal figure in Walter White's morally ambiguous journey. Her death is particularly noteworthy because it wasn't directly caused by Walt's actions, but rather by his deliberate inaction. This incident marked a disturbing turning point in Walt's character development, revealing the depths of his ruthlessness. Jane Margolis was a lot of things: a tattoo artist, Jesse's neighbor and landlord, and his girlfriend too. She was also trying to stay clean after struggling with addiction, and her dad, Donald Margolis, was an air traffic controller. Walter saw Jane as a major problem when she got Jesse hooked on heroin, which almost blew a huge deal with Gus Fring. Walt tried to get Jesse clean by withholding his share of the profits, but Jane blackmailed him into giving her the money instead. After talking to Jane's dad at a bar without realizing who he was, Walt went back to Jesse's place to make amends. But when he tried to wake Jesse, Jane rolled over and started choking on her vomit due to an overdose. Walt's first instinct was to help, but then he stopped himself, thinking that letting her die would give him more control over Jesse and maybe even save Jesse's life. Walt broke down in tears after she died, but quickly pulled himself together. Walt's morality took a hit the night Jane died, but he wasn't the only one affected. Her death set off a chain reaction that had horrific consequences and claimed a lot of lives. This takes us to the next group of people who died as a result of Walt's actions. Walter White's actions indirectly led to the devastating Wayfarer 515 plane crash, which resulted in the loss of 167 lives. This tragic event was a direct consequence of air traffic controller Donald Margolis's error, who was still reeling from the death of his daughter Jane. To put it simply, Walter White's decision to let Jane die rather than saving her from choking on her own vomit set off a catastrophic chain reaction. Donald Margolis, overcome with grief, made a fatal mistake while working as an air traffic controller, leading to the collision between Wayfarer 515 and a charter plane. The aftermath of the crash was met with widespread shock and grief. Walter White, who had a hand in the events leading up to the crash, watched in horror as the planes collided from his backyard. Following the crash, the serene surroundings of Albuquerque were disrupted by the macabre fallout, including the disturbing sight of a charred pink teddy bear, which came to rest in the unlikely setting of Walter White's pool. The ruthless execution of two rival dealers served as a stark reminder of Walter White's willingness to do whatever it took to maintain his grip on the criminal underworld. When Jesse found out that these dealers had killed Combo and were using kids to deal and kill for them, he decided he had to take them out. But Walt wouldn't help Jesse make poison to kill the rival dealers, so Jesse tried to take care of it himself until Gus Fring stepped in. Gus tried to find a middle ground, telling the dealers to stop using kids. They agreed, and Jesse decided to call a truce, but the dealers didn't stop there. That night, they killed Tomas. It's still unclear if Gus told them to do it or if they were trying to get Jesse to react. Consumed by revenge, Jesse went after the dealers, determined to settle the score once and for all. Jesse left his car in an alley and walked towards the dealers, gun in hand, ready for a fight. But when he got there, the dealers just stepped out of their car, looking calm, and started handling their guns. Just as the dealers were about to draw their firearms, a Pontiac Aztek driven by Walt suddenly appeared and struck both individuals. One dealer was killed instantly, crushed beneath the vehicle, while the other sustained severe injuries after being thrown over the car and landing on the pavement. Walt swiftly exited the vehicle and approached the surviving dealer, who was attempting to retrieve his fallen pistol. Walt, however, was quicker and executed the dealer with a single bullet to the head. He then turned to Jesse, who was in a state of shock, and instructed him to flee. The deaths of the two dealers significantly strained Walt's relationship with Gus. In the aftermath, Jesse went into hiding to avoid reprisal, while Walt met with Gus and Mike in a remote desert location to mitigate the consequences. By the time Walt took the name Heisenberg, he was no longer just a player. He was the game, and in this game, only the ruthless one survived. After what happened, Gus thought Walt was too unreliable and planned to have him killed as soon as Gail Bodischer, who was ironically the next person on this bloody list, could take over. Walt may not have pulled the trigger, but make no mistake, he's the one who made it happen. Gail Bodischer was a chemist brought in by Gus to set up the underground meth lab, assist Walt while Jesse was away, and monitor Walt's activities. Since Walt didn't have much time left due to his cancer, Gus urged Gail to pick up Walt's cooking technique fast. With the realization that he had become disposable, Walt viewed Gail's presence as a significant threat, leading him to resort to extreme actions in order to safeguard his life and Jesse's. Walt, knowing that Gus needed at least one chemist who knew the blue sky formula to continue cooking, proposed to Jesse that they must kill Gail, and since Walt was under constant surveillance, Jesse had to be the one to do it. When Walt arrived at the laundromat, Mike took him to the lab and told him to go downstairs and fix an issue. But Walt had figured out that this was just a trick to get him killed, so he begged Mike not to go through with it. With his life on the line, Walt tried to negotiate with Mike, offering to work for free. When that didn't work, he offered to give up Jesse. Walt then called Jesse and told him that he had to kill Gail immediately, or else he'd be killed by Victor and Mike. This prompted Jesse to take drastic action, proceeding to Gail's apartment, pulling out his pistol, and despite Gail's pleas for mercy, shooting him in the face with trembling hands. Now that Gail's out of the picture, Walt's back in business, but this puts him on even more shaky ground with Gus, and it's clear only one of them is going to make it out alive. Walt's next kill was a masterclass in strategic execution with the use of a bomb. In a stunning display of strategic brilliance, Walter leveraged his unexpected alliance with Hector Salamanca to devise a plan of breathtaking audacity. And the outcome was a dramatic and unforgettable demise that simultaneously claimed the lives of Gus Fring, Walter's most formidable adversary, and Tyrus Kit. This masterful stroke cemented Walt's reputation as a cunning and ruthless operator. Walt was racing against time to find a way to kill Gus before Gus killed him. Then, through Jesse and Saul, he found out about Gus's feud with Hector and how he tortured him, which gave Walt a glimmer of hope. Walt paid a visit to Hector at the nursing home, armed with info that would change everything. He convinced Hector to join forces and take down Gus, playing on Hector's hatred for Gus. They went over the plan, and then Hector called for a nurse, asking to talk to Hank at the DEA. But here's the thing, it was all a setup. They knew Gus would find out and come running to kill Hector himself. Gus arrived in Hector's room ready to deliver the final blow, but Hector had one last trick up his sleeve. As Gus started to mock him, Hector looked him straight in the eye and then started ringing his bell like mad. Gus was caught off guard, and before he knew it, the bomb under Hector's wheelchair detonated, killing Hector and Tyrus on the spot. Gus tried to escape, but it was too late. In a really gruesome scene, Gus stumbled out of the room, his face completely mangled, and fell to the ground, dead. Stay one step ahead, like and subscribe, so you're not Walter White's next target. With Gus out of the picture, Walt turned his attention to the rest of the drug empire that had tried to take him down, and he started by killing 2 more of Gus's men. With Jesse still being held hostage at the super lab, these men regrettably stood in the way of Walt's efforts to rescue him. As the door to the super lab slid open, Walt burst into action, his movements swift and deliberate as he gunned down both men with ruthless efficiency. Walt quickly rescued Jesse, and the two bid farewell to Gus's lab with a final cleanup and a legendary exit as the place burned to the ground behind them. Walt's bold move in the lab, taking out those 2 guys without hesitation, probably came from the confidence boost he got from beating Fring. At this point, Walt was fully in Heisenberg mode, so taking out the 2 goons holding Jesse at the super lab was no big deal. In the continued fallout following Gus Fring's demise, Walt's subsequent action in a moment of rage resulted in the demise of Mike Ehrmantraut. Mike Ehrmantraut was a former Marine and cop who turned to a life of crime, working as a hitman and fixer to support his family. Following Gus Fring's demise, Mike opted to reorganize his priorities, ensuring the financial security of his incarcerated associates, but his efforts were soon complicated by the DEA's intense scrutiny, which created tension between him and Walt. In an effort to safeguard his own interests, Walt requested that Mike disclose the identities of his associates, but Mike declined to provide this information. As Mike walked away, Walt's anger snapped, and he shot Mike in the stomach with Mike's own revolver. In a desperate bid to flee, Mike accelerated his vehicle, but his escape was short-lived as he crashed a short distance away. Walt, overcome with shock and remorse, approached Mike, who had managed to stumble a few yards down a riverbank before succumbing to his injuries. As Walt carefully relieved Mike of his pistol, Mike rebuffed Walt's attempts at apology, instead requesting to be allowed to die in peace. The two shared a poignant moment of silence, gazing out at the river before Mike's life slipped away. I was really bummed by Mike's death, and I didn't think it was needed. Walt could have just gotten the names another way. With Mike out of the way, Walt's Heisenberg persona took over and he became unstoppable. He then took care of the loose ends by killing off the employees Mike had been protecting, showing just how ruthless he could be. The problem with these men was that some of them had actually met Walt, and with the DEA breathing down his neck, he couldn't take any chances. Faced with a limited window of opportunity to eliminate multiple targets before DEA intervention, the prison environment was transformed into a venue for systematic executions, with various brutal methods employed to neutralize the individuals in question across different sectors of the correctional facility. As Walt received the news of the mission's success, his expression remained steadfastly calm, a testament to his increasingly hardened demeanor, which had become desensitized to the violence he had set in motion. One might have assumed that Walt's bloodlust would have been satiated, having neutralized all potential betrayers. However, his unrelenting ambition and avarice led to the tragic deaths of DEA operatives Hank Schrader and Stephen Gomez. Thanks to Jesse, Hank and Steve were able to lure Walt to his hideout, where they had planned to confront him with the evidence that proved he was Heisenberg. As the situation spiraled out of control, Walt's initial instinct was to summon the formidable Jack Welker and his cohorts. However, in a fleeting moment of clarity, Walt attempted to cancel the request, hoping to avoid further bloodshed. Tragically, Jack's disregard for Walt's cancellation proved catastrophic, as he arrived on the scene with a phalanx of heavily armed men, setting the stage for a deadly confrontation. The violent confrontation resulted in the senseless murder of Hank, following Steve's earlier demise. This catastrophic event served as the catalyst for Walt's complete and irreversible metamorphosis into Heisenberg. Walt's actions ultimately cost him his family, and with that, he had nothing left to lose. This freed him to devise a ruthless plan to destroy Jack Welker and his crew. Jack Welker's gang, aka the Aryan Brotherhood or White Power Prison Gang, was a neo-Nazi group based in New Mexico. They weren't connected to any real groups, but their tattoos and some dialogue showed they were into white supremacist stuff. Walt took out the entire gang in 2010, using a car with a remote-controlled M60 machine gun. He pretended to make a deal with Jack, then used himself as a human shield to save Jesse, while activating the gun, which tore through the compound, killing almost everyone except for Todd, Jack's nephew, Jesse, Walt, and surprisingly, Jack Welker himself. This brings us to Walt's next kill, an individual who miraculously survived the devastating M60 assault, Jack Welker himself. Although he survived the brutal assault, he wasn't so lucky and was left with a brutal injury. There was nothing in the world he could say that could stop Walt from taking his life. Jesse was quick to act and strangled Todd to death, while Walt also didn't waste time and ended Jack's life with a bullet to the head. This was the exact same manner that Jack killed Hank. Walt was able to carry out his revenge, but he was left with a mortal injury that I will talk about soon. Walt's ultimate act of retribution can be argued to have been directed towards Lydia Rodart Quayle. The same night Walt took out Jack's gang, Lydia called Todd to check if Walt was dead, not knowing Walt and Jesse had just killed everyone. Walt answered Todd's phone and told Lydia he'd poisoned her tea with ricin, then hung up on her. After the massacre at Jack's compound, Jesse heard a news report about a Houston woman, later identified as Lydia, who'd been poisoned by Walt. The police were investigating her connection to Walt, but Lydia's condition was critical and she wasn't expected to make it. Lydia's death wrapped up Walt's revenge tour, and it leads us to the final person he killed, himself. After Jesse left Jack's yard, Walt looked at his wound and knew he was running out of time. Walt walked into Jack's lab, looked around at the equipment and smiled, knowing his family was taken care of. He put his bloody hand on a tank and then collapsed, bleeding out and passing away. The police showed up soon after and found Walt's body on the floor, in the one place where he'd always felt most alive, the chemistry lab. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, be sure to subscribe for more Breaking Bad content.